In today's video, we will dive into the depth of Saint Padre Pio's prayer, a supplication of faith that seeks God's presence and proximity in every moment of life. This prayer, known for its spiritual strength and comfort it offers, teaches us to depend on divine grace, to strengthen our faith and find peace even in difficult times. If you feel the heart touched by this message, subscribe to the channel and, in the comments, state, "I live under the protection and love of God." Come find out how this prayer can transform your life and guide you into a journey of eternal faith and love. The strength of Father Pio's miraculous prayer. Stay with me, Lord, for you need your presence not to forget you. These are the first words of one of the most intense and revered prayers of Saint Padre Pio de Pietrelcina, a supplication of one of the saints best known for their spiritual experiences and healing gifts. In this video, we will deeply dive into the meaning of this prayer, exploring each passage, every invocation, to understand the power of intercession and the role that faith can play in our daily lives. Before we go on, if you feel your heart touched by what we will share, subscribe to the channel, and in the comments below, express your desire with a powerful phrase such as, "I am guided by divine light and protected at all times." Now, let's begin the spiritual journey that will show us the depth of this prayer of Father Pio, divided into moments of reflection, faith, and hope, revealing what it has to offer us for a life in union with the divine. The meaning of divine presence in our lives. Stay with me, Lord, for I need your presence not to forget you. You know how easily abandoned you. These initial words present us with the deep yearning of being in the presence of the divine. Father Pio opens prayer with a direct affirmation of dependence and humility, a request that reminds us how easy it is, amid trials of the world, distance ourselves from our faith. For those who seek a high spiritual life, God's presence is like breathing, necessary and constant. Prayer reflects a universal truth, our human weakness and the need to anchor ourselves in the divine presence. On the way to spirituality, the sense of presence goes far beyond feeling God by our side. It involves internal transformation, where heart, mind, and actions align with love and peace. It is an appeal for God to be not only an occasional visitor, but an ever-present friend, a light that never goes out. Father Pio, with his singular devotion, reminds us here that the connection with the Lord is not momentary, but a link that should be strengthened every day. He says this prayer as a faithful servant who recognizes his fragility and longs for the divine force to resist the constantly arising temptations and deviations. Prayer is therefore a request for intimacy. Divine presence, as Padre Pio suggests, is a state of being where we are always close to the heart of God, cultivating the love that protects us and keeps us firm. It's about learning to keep calm in the midst of difficulties and to feel the comfort of a friendly hand that never goes away. Our first call, then, is for each of us to remember this importance and how God's presence in our lives helps us never forget it, even in times of pain or despair. In times of discouragement or fear, the divine presence becomes our refuge, our support and strength. Faith teaches us to seek this presence with courage and determination. Like Padre Pio, who faced numerous tribulations, we are called to develop a resilient spirit, capable of finding peace and joy in proximity to the Lord. Having God's presence is not just being close to Him, it is to become a home of love, peace, and understanding. Thus, this is an invitation to all of us, that we seek to live every day intensely and consciously, remembering that this proximity to God is our greatest protection. Every step we take toward the Lord is a step away from fear, loneliness, and doubt. At this point of prayer, we see that God's presence is the basis for spiritual journey. It is He who sustains us, who welcomes us, who gets us up in each fall. We need Him not only in times of joy, but especially in times of anguish, when everything seems uncertain and hazy. As we advance, the next excerpt from prayer will reveal us more about the essence of divine force, an inexhaustible resource that Padre Pio understood so deeply. Let's follow to understand what it means to count on this strength and how it acts like a shield in our lives. The power of divine strength in our spiritual walk. Stay with me, Lord, because I am weak and I need your strength so as not to fall so many times. Here, Padre Pio expresses a deep and disinterested love for God, asking for only Jesus' presence in his life, without expecting rewards or favors. This request reveals the essence of a mature and genuine faith, where the greatest joy of the faithful is to be with God, regardless of circumstances. Padre Pio teaches us that the value of our relationship with the divine is not in the benefits that we may obtain, but in the sacred presence that accompanies us and that sustains us in any situation. This desire to be with God, seeking anything in return, is a sign of humility and complete surrender. Father Pio knew that divine consolations, moments of peace, comfort, or spiritual joy, are precious blessings, but what he really wanted was a constant communion with God. He understood that the presence of Jesus is the greatest treasure, the gift that fills the soul of peace and serenity, even without visible favors. In asking only the presence of Jesus, Father Pio demonstrates that his love is sincere, free from personal interests. Is this request an invitation for each of us to evaluate the depth of our faith? Are we seeking God for whom He is, or just for what He can offer us? Father Pio shows us that true love for God is the one who rejoices in the simplicity of His presence, without demanding anything but His love. This presence is what strengthens the soul in difficult times, which gives us serenity and hope, even when we do not receive the answers we desire. For Padre Pio, being with God is sufficient, for he knows that proximity to the Creator brings a peace that overcomes any human understanding. This prayer reminds us that the greatest gift we can receive is the grace of feeling the divine presence in our lives. This search for God, without other intentions, is proof of pure and disinterested love. By asking only the divine presence, Padre Pio expresses the desire of a life where every moment is lived in communion with the Lord, where faith and love are the center of everything. It is a call for us to learn to value the sacred company and that we can live with the awareness that we are always in the presence of God. May we also, as well as Padre Pio, desire the divine presence in our daily lives, not by miracles or favors, but for the simple joy of being with Him. May this love be the basis of our lives, guiding us, strengthening and renewing us every day. Finally, let's go to the last part of this prayer of Padre Pio, where he expresses his desire to love God forever, a definitive surrender that transcends time and space. The desire to love God for all eternity. Stay with me, Lord, it is only to you that I seek, your love, your grace, your will, your heart, your spirit, because I love you and I ask you no other reward but the increase of this love, to love with all the heart on earth and continue to love you perfectly for all eternity. In this final passage, Father Pio reveals the apex of his prayer, the desire to love God not only during his earthly life, but forever, in a love that transcends the barriers of time and space. This request represents the purest and most sublime in the Christian faith, for he wants his love for God to be full and perfect, both in this life and in eternity. Father Pio teaches us that true love for God is not limited to the circumstances of our earthly existence. It is a love that begins here and projects itself beyond death, seeking eternal unity with the Creator. He understands that the supreme reward is not in earthly blessings, but in the possibility of being with God forever, of living in His love in a perfect and complete way. This desire to love God forever is an invitation for us to all open our hearts to this infinite love. When we love God, our spirit finds His true essence, for we were created for this relationship, for this communion that does not end with earthly life. Father Pio reminds us that by seeking to love God in an increasingly intense way, we are preparing our soul for eternity, where this love will be full and absolute. Asking God to increase love in our lives is an act of humility and gratitude. Father Pio knew that even though he is a dedicated saint, there is always room to love more, to surrender more. This request reflects the recognition that love for God is an endless journey, a path where we can always deepen and grow. He knew that God's love is the strength that transforms us, heals our wounds, and that gives us true peace. The eternal love that Father Pio desires is a complete union with the divine will. He does not just want to love God superficially, but wants every aspect of his existence to be in tune with the heart and spirit of the Lord. This is the greatest goal of a life of faith, to live in perfect harmony with God, loving Him with all his heart, with all his mind and with all the soul. May we, like Padre Pio, aspire to this unconditional love, to this sincere desire to be with God forever. May each of us ask the grace to love God in a full way, to dedicate our lives to the divine love and will, knowing that by doing so, we are preparing for true happiness, eternal union with the Creator. We then conclude our reflection on the miraculous prayer of Father Pio, a supplication of faith that inspires us to seek God's presence in every moment of our lives. If this content has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more reflections like this and share in the comments. I live in love for the grace of God and to your glory. May we all seek this communion, this living and transformative faith, and that the example of Father Pio guide us in our spiritual walk. Continue to us to explore more about the ways of faith, prayer, and love to God. Thank you for following up here. May the content of Padre Pio be a continuous inspiration for your life of faith and your relationship with God. May words and teachings resonate in your heart and strengthen your spiritual walk. Here, Padre Pio reminds us of a truth that we all face: human weakness. He does not hide his vulnerability before God. On the contrary, he exposes it with sincerity, asking the strength of the Lord to resist the difficulties that life presents to him. Each of us, at some point, finds their weaknesses, the moments when fear, doubt, and insecurity seem greater than our ability to move on. In spirituality, recognizing its own weakness is an act of humility, an acceptance that the true force comes from above, not ourselves. Many saints, such as Padre Pio, have embraced this idea, understanding that by accepting divine help, we are surrendering to greater power than everything rules. It is this divine force that makes us get up after each fall, continue even in the face of the biggest challenges. Father Pio knew that this force came from his confidence in God, and that confidence was the basis of his life. He understood that by surrendering to divine will, he found a power that transcends human capabilities. It is a force that is available to all who give themselves to divine love and accept that God guide them. When we allow God to be our strength, we overcome barriers that would be insurmountable for ourselves. This strength is not only physical, but spiritual and emotional. It helps us face trials and deal with feelings such as fear, sadness, and doubt. It is a silent but firm force that acts deep in the heart and moves us forward despite the difficulties. Father Pio calls for this strength because he knows he cannot fight alone. He understands that in his humanity he is subject to failure and needs something greater to support the weight of trials. Thus this prayer is a reminder to us, in our moments of greater weakness, when we do not know where to go or what to do, we can ask for the strength of God. Prayer teaches us to value this strength, to cultivate it in our daily lives. It inspires us to be persistent, never to give up, and to trust that with divine help we can overcome any obstacle. When we recognize that our own strength has limits, we make room for God's power to manifest, guiding ourselves and strengthening ourselves. In this request, Padre Pio reveals a precious lesson. The humility of asking for help makes us stronger, as it connects us to God's love and protection. On the journey of life, we all face moments of difficulty, but prayer reminds us that we are not alone. We have a loving God who walks with us and gives us the strength necessary to move, even when everything seems impossible. In summoning divine strength, we are invited to walk with confidence. This power sustains us and gives us vigor to face each day with courage, certain that we are always supported by the hand of God. It is a force that leads us and animates us, that helps us overcome fear and uncertainty. Thus, when we feel weak, aimless, or hope, let us remember this prayer and follow the example of Father Pio. Let us ask God to be our strength. Faith teaches us that with the Lord by our side, our strength is renewed and our determination restored. Now, with a strengthened heart, we go to the next part of the prayer, where Padre Pio reveals the sense of living with fervor and passion for divine presence. Let us continue, then, to understand how to maintain fervor in our spiritual life and how it brings us even closer to the essence of divine love. The importance of fervor in spiritual life. Stay with me, Lord, for you are my life, and without you I lose the fervor. Father Pio, in this passage, teaches us about the importance of living with fervor, a living flame of devotion that constantly burns in our hearts. Without God, he states, this flame goes out, and the spiritual life loses its vitality, its essence. Fervor is the intense expression of love and commitment to the sacred, something that moves us toward what is greater, to what transcends. For Padre Pio, living with fervor is to be in constant communion with God, feeding this call daily through prayer, reflection, and good deeds. It is a total and constant delivery, a force that leads us to seek a life that is not content with the ordinary, but which wants the constant presence of the divine. When we lack fervor, our connection with the spiritual weakens, and we easily let ourselves be carried away by discouragement and routine. He shows us that fervor is like the fuel of the soul, which keeps our search for a higher, more conscious, and meaningful life alive. Spiritual fervor, which guided Father Pio so much, is something we can all cultivate, for it is within the reach of those who truly want to deepen their faith. Fervor thus becomes a shield against the distractions of the world and against temptations that try to move us away from God. The fervor in the life of a faithful is not a passing feeling, it is a force that shapes each thought, every word, and every action. Father Pio asks God to remain with him, not to lose this spiritual energy, this incessant desire to live in union with the sacred. For us, this means that prayer, the study of divine teachings, and the practice of charity are ways to keep this flame on. Upon reflecting on this request from Padre Pio, we realize that fervor is proof of a living faith. A faith that is not lived with fervor becomes an empty practice, a series of lifeless rituals. Father Pio invites us, through his words, to make our spirituality something genuine, intense, and transformative. This fervor gives us strength to move on, to face the challenges, and to approach God's will. Maintaining fervor is then a daily choice. It is the decision to wake up every day with a desire to be better, to seek the divine presence, and to do good. It is this dedication that makes spiritual life vibrant and that helps us overcome the temptations that move us away from God. Father Pio knew that without fervor, it is easy to fall into apathy, indifference, and coldness. Living fervently makes us more aware of the voice of God, more sensitive to his signs, and most willing to respond to his call. This spiritual enthusiasm is what transforms our journey of faith into something truly extraordinary. Thus, asking God to remain by his side, Padre Pio recognizes that fervor is not an isolated achievement, but something that must be nourished by the divine presence. The fervor is also a form of gratitude. It is the expression of a heart that recognizes God's blessings and responds with love and devotion. It is an inner movement that raises us, which makes us closer to heaven, because it reminds us that we are called to live a full life, full of joy and hope. So let us be inspired by this Padre Pio's request and seek to maintain fervor in our lives. May we wake up every day with a desire to live our faith intensely, certain that this flame will guide us and strengthen us in every step of the journey. We now go to Padre Pio's next request, where he asks the Lord to be his light, showing us the importance of constant divine orientation in our ways. Divine light as a guide in our lives. Stay with me, Lord, for you are my light, and without you, I am in darkness. In this passage, Padre Pio calls for God's presence as the light that illuminates his steps, the clarity that dissipates the shadows of doubt and confusion. In the spiritual walk, this light is the divine presence itself, which shows us the right way when everything seems uncertain and helps us to see beyond appearances, guiding us to the truth. Without this light, life becomes hazy, and we easily fall into the traps of worldly illusions, the ways that keep us away from what really matters. The darkness that Padre Pio mentions is not just the absence of physical light, it is the emptiness we feel when we are far from the presence of God. It is the feeling of being lost, not knowing which direction to go. All of us, at some point, face this inner darkness, where the challenges of life seem too great and where the answers seem unreachable. It is in these moments that divine light is most necessary. Father Pio teaches us that this light is understanding, wisdom, and orientation that can only come from God. It is the certainty that even in the most difficult situations there is a way out, a solution. And it is this light that helps us not give up, find strength to move on and overcome adversity. When we ask God to be our light, we are asking for clarity to see things as they really are, so that we can make wise and fair decisions. Divine light is also a headlight of peace in times of turbulence. In times of anxiety and anguish, it is this light that calms our hearts and gives us the confidence that we are not alone. For Father Pio, God is this constant presence that illuminates the mind and heart, allowing you to see beyond the challenges of the present moment. He knew that without this light the soul is lost, deviating itself from divine purpose and love. When we are guided by divine light, our actions become reflections of our faith, and our way is illuminated by hope. Just as the sun is born every day to give us light and heat, God's presence in our lives is this constant force that never erases, even on the darkest nights of our soul. It is a light that welcomes us, guides us, and protects us from spiritual and emotional dangers. Moreover, this light is the symbol of a life full of purpose and direction. Father Pio knew that by allowing God to be his light, he was surrendering to a life of discernment and wisdom. With this divine orientation, we can better understand the challenges we face, see the lessons that each experience brings us, and find peace even in the midst of storms. To keep this light alive, it is necessary to seek God's presence continuously through prayer and reflection. Just as a lamp needs fuel to stay lit, our spiritual life needs constant contact with the divine so that we can shine and guide others around us. This Padre Pio's request is therefore a reminder to all of us: never let our light go out, and to trust whenever God will illuminate our steps, even in the most difficult times. May we, like him, seek this light and allow it to transform us, inspire us, and guide us into every decision we make. Now we will advance to the next passage, where Father Pio calls for God to reveal his will. We will see how this request reflects the desire to align one's life with divine purpose and the importance of submission to God's plan to find true peace. Divine will as a path to peace. Stay with me, Lord, to show me your will. At this moment of prayer, Padre Pio guides us to a deep reflection on the value of submission to divine will. He expresses a sincere desire not to get lost in his own wishes or selfish illusions, but of walking in the direction pointed by God. This surrender to the will of the Lord is one of the greatest challenges and, at the same time, one of the greatest acts of faith that a faithful can manifest. Recognizing divine will requires humility, for it implies giving up our own plans and expectations to follow the designs God has reserved for us. Father Pio, with his life of dedication and sacrifice, understood that true peace is reached only when we surrender to this superior will. Many times we have difficulty understanding the ways for which we are led, but confidence in the divine plan allows us to see beyond the present moment and believe that everything contributes to good. God's will is not an arbitrary whim, but a plan that guides us to a life of fullness and purpose. Father Pio knew that following this plan, he found a greater meaning for each challenge and each achievement. It is a call to each of us, to have faith and to accept that even when we do not understand the circumstances, there is a divine reason behind each event. When we ask God to show us his will, we are also seeking discernment, wisdom, and courage. This request means that we want to live according to the purpose for which we have been created, and this requires opening our hearts and eyes to see the signs it places in our way. Father Pio shows us that divine will is a safe compass that guides us for peace, to genuine happiness, and leaves us from the distractions and mistakes that the world offers. Submission to God's will is both liberating and challenging. It is liberating because it allows us to unleash control and trust that we are in the hands of those who know every detail of our lives and our future. It is challenging because we ask us to put aside our own desires and fears to follow a direction that we often do not fully understand. Father Pio, with his unshakable faith, inspires us to have that same trust and find in divine will a path of peace. As we live according to God's will, we experience deep internal harmony. It is not a life-free life, but a life in which each obstacle becomes an opportunity for growth and spiritual strengthening. When our will is aligned with God's, peace settles in our hearts, for we know that we are living according to the plan He has set for us. This request from Padre Pio is a demonstration of mature faith, who understands that real happiness is reached only in full communion with the Creator. He teaches us that by seeking divine will, we become more receptive to love, compassion, and wisdom from God. It is a prayer that invites us to live a life of purpose, to find joy in service to others, and to be witnesses of divine love in the world. May we learn from this request from Father Pio and, in our prayers, also ask God to show us His way. In doing so, we are preparing to live fully, with an open heart and a receptive mind to what God wants for us. Each decision, each step towards God's will, leads us to a life of meaning, purpose, and peace. Now, let's go to the next passage, where Padre Pio asks God to help him hear His voice and then His steps. Then we will explore how listening attentive to the voice of God is essential for a safe and wisdom walk. The importance of listening to the divine voice and following its steps. Stay with me, Lord, that you may hear your voice and follow you. In this passage, Padre Pio expresses his desire to hear the voice of God and follow His teachings, revealing a stance of humility and obedience. Asking the Lord to remain beside him to guide him, he recognizes that divine listening is a central element to live according to faith. It is an invitation to each of us, to learn to listen, to discern, and to follow what God wants from us, even in the midst of the distractions and pressures of the world. Listening to the voice of God is a daily practice that requires inner silence and willingness to open the heart. This listening is the basis of an authentic spiritual life, for it is through it that we can distinguish what is truly important, which brings us closer to good and peace. Father Pio teaches us that to hear God we need to move away from the noise that surrounds us and seek intimate communion with Him, where the divine voice can be clearly perceived in our hearts. By following this voice, we enter a path of purpose and alignment with what we really are. Father Pio knew that obedience to the divine voice is an act of faith and trust, for often this guidance asks us that we abandon old habits and beliefs that no longer serve us. Listening to God is an act of renewal, from opening to the new and what is truly transformative. Following the voice of God protects us from the uncertainties and temptations that arise in our way. When we are in tune with this guidance, we find the strength to overcome obstacles and to make choices that are in harmony with our values and the greater purpose of our lives. It is this careful listening that helps us discern the right one from the wrong, the true of the illusory. Father Pio knew that the voice of God is a safe and reliable guide. He understood that, following the divine steps, he was walking toward peace and true happiness. This prayer is therefore a memory that we are all invited to develop sensitivity to listening to the sacred and the courage to respond to that voice. It is not just a matter of listening, but of obeying, of putting into practice what God inspires us to do. Listening to the voice of God also makes us more aware of our role in the world. In following your guidelines, we become instruments of peace, compassion, and love. Thus, each of our actions begins to reflect the divine presence, making our lives a living testimony of faith. Father Pio knew that as he followed God, he was not only transforming his own life, but also inspiring others to seek this same connection. This attentive listening is a skill that we cultivate with practice and patience. We must learn to trust that even when we do not understand the reason for divine orientation, it is always guiding us for good. God, in His infinite wisdom, knows what is best for each of us, and it is this certainty that strengthens us in our spiritual journey. May we learn from Padre Pio to value this listening practice, reserving moments for silence and reflection, allowing the divine voice to guide our steps and show us the way. When we follow this voice, we find the true purpose and meaning of our existence. Following, Padre Pio reveals his desire for a deep love for God, to always keep Him in His company. Let us continue, then, and explore the importance of this love as a force that keeps us close to the divine, cultivating a relationship that fills and sustains us. The desire to love God deeply and remain in your company. Stay with me, Lord, for I want to love you a lot and always be in your company. In this part of prayer, Padre Pio reveals one of the greatest yearnings of his soul, the desire to love God intensely, in a full and continuous way. He recognizes that love for God is the center of all spiritual life, the strength that keeps us linked to purpose and that brings meaning to all things. This desire for love is a universal call, something we can feel within us as an impulse that brings us closer to what is eternal and true. Father Pio reminds us that this love is the basis of a life in communion with God. To love the Lord deeply is to cultivate a relationship that goes beyond formalism and words. It is a commitment of heart and soul. This love he mentions is a surrender, an incessant search for living in the divine presence, keeping his heart always turned to the Creator and letting it be the center of our existence. This desire for love is not a passing feeling, but an essential necessity of the soul, which feels that only in God can find fullness and fulfillment. For Padre Pio, loving God is the key to a life rich in peace and in purpose. He shows us that when we wish this love, we are also wishing true happiness, one that does not depend on circumstances and that remains in ourselves in times of difficulty. To love God deeply is also to accept His teachings, your designs, and your corrections with gratitude and humility. It is a love that requires us to change, to grow, and to get closer to divine values and teachings. Father Pio lived this love so intensely that, at all times, God placed first, demonstrating a genuine desire to always be in his company. This love is both a source of comfort and strength. When we love God, we find in Him a refuge where we can strengthen and recover our peace. It is a relationship that sustains us and gives us the courage to face the difficulties, because we know that we are accompanied by the one who loves us infinitely. To love God is to be sure that we are never alone, that we always have a source of support and guidance. Padre Pio's prayer, by expressing this desire for love, invites us to look inside ourselves and to reflect on the depth of our own relationship with the divine. He inspires us to seek authentic love, which does not depend on the circumstances and manifests itself in our attitudes and our way of living. This love for God transforms us, causing every thought, every word, and every action to be impregnated with faith and reverence. This love also manifests itself in charity, care for others, compassion, and generosity. Father Pio knew that true love for God leads us to see everyone as brothers, as children of the same Creator, and drives us to act with goodness and mercy. The desire to love God deeply is, therefore, a desire to be instruments of His love in the world. By cultivating this love, we realize that our life gains a new meaning. Little things become opportunities for praise, challenges become lessons, and every moment is a chance to get closer to God. Father Pio understood that, when he wished to be in the company of God, he was asking to live a full life, guided by faith and divine love. May we, as Father Pio, ask God to help us love Him with all our souls and always keep our lives in His presence. May we find in Him the joy and strength to overcome all adversities and to become closer and closer to His light and His truth. Following, Padre Pio asks God to help him be faithful. Let us then explore the importance of faithfulness to God, a virtue that strengthens our faith and sustains us in the face of temptations and challenges. The commitment to be faithful to God. Stay with me, Lord, if you want to be faithful to you. In this passage of prayer, Padre Pio expresses one of the most beautiful commitments of a dedicated heart, faithfulness to God. He asks the Lord to remain by his side, that he may resist temptations and remain firm in his faith. This supplication is the recognition that fidelity is not something we can achieve alone. It depends on divine grace, which strengthens us and keeps us on the right track. Father Pio knew that in our human fragility we can only be truly faithful to God's aid and constant presence. Faithfulness to God is the basis of every solid spiritual life, for it represents perseverance, constancy, and loyalty in our relationship with the Creator. To be faithful is to remain beside God in all circumstances, whether in times of joy or suffering. Padre Pio reminds us that faithfulness is the expression of a love that does not shake with difficulties, a love that remains firm even in the face of trials. Faithfulness implies a conscious decision to put God first, above anything or person. In a world full of distractions, maintaining this constancy is a challenge, but Father Pio teaches us that with divine help, it is possible to overcome temptations and strengthen our loyalty to the Lord. He knew that, when seeking this fidelity, he was building a lasting and deep relationship with the divine. To be faithful to God, we need to cultivate prayer, inner silence, and commitment to divine teachings. This faithfulness manifests itself in the choices we make every day, in small and great decisions. Father Pio inspires us to be vigilant, not to deviate from the path of faith, and to remember that by remaining faithful, we become stronger and more connected to the truth and love of God. Faithfulness is also an expression of trust. By being faithful to God, we demonstrate that we believe in His plans and promises, even when we cannot clearly see the way ahead of us. This confidence gives us serenity, helps us face challenges, and allows us to rest in the certainty that God will always be by our side. Father Pio understood that this fidelity was a source of peace and security, for he knew that nothing could separate him from God's love. This request from Padre Pio is an invitation for each of us to strengthen his own fidelity, seeking in God the strength necessary to resist adversity. It is a call so that we will not be shaken by the difficulties and that we may remain firm in faith, even when the world around us tries to move away from the divine. Faithfulness is a virtue that requires dedication and perseverance, but brings a lasting joy, a peace that does not depend on external circumstances. Faithfulness also brings us closer to holiness, for it makes us more similar to Christ, who was faithful to the end. Father Pio, with his example of life, shows us that this fidelity is possible and that when we keep loyal to God, we experience a deeper intimacy with the Creator. To be faithful is to be in harmony with the divine will. It is to live with a heart focused on God, finding in Him the motivation and reason for everything we do. May we, like Father Pio, ask God to help us be faithful, keep our hearts always focused on the love and peace that He offers us. May our faithfulness be an expression of our love and gratitude, and may we find in God the strength to resist all trials. Now we will advance to Padre Pio's next request, where he wants his soul to be a place of comfort and love for God. Let us reflect on how we can also be this refuge of love, making our lives a testimony of welcome and devotion. Be a place of comfort and love for God. Stay with me, Lord, for, as poor my soul, I want it to be a place of comfort to you, a nest of love. In this passage, Padre Pio reveals a deep desire to offer his soul as a refuge of peace and love to God. He recognizes his humility, his smallness, but still expresses the desire for his heart to be a space where the Lord may find comfort and joy. This supplication teaches us the importance of cultivating a heart cozy, a place where God can dwell, even if we are aware of our limitations and imperfections. Being a place of comfort to God is an invitation for each of us to make a testimony of love and dedication. Padre Pio understood that despite human weaknesses, we can become a shelter of love for God, a space where He finds welcome. This prayer teaches us that, although we are fragile, our love can be a valuable gift to the Creator, a pure and sincere offering that expresses our gratitude and our desire to please Him. To be a place of comfort, our soul must be at peace, free from the feelings of grudge, envy, or pride. We need to cultivate humility and love, virtues that make our hearts similar to that of Christ. Father Pio knew that in developing these qualities, his life would become an offering of love to God, an example of faith and kindness that would inspire everyone around him. This desire to be a nest of love is a commitment to the purity of intention, to the sincere desire to live to please God and to do His will. When we place the Lord first, our actions become a reflection of this love, and our soul becomes a sacred space where the divine finds a home. Father Pio shows us that even in our fragility we can be instruments of love and peace. Padre Pio's prayer also teaches us the importance of offering God our moments of joy, pain, doubt, and hope. It is by delivering all that we are, honest and humble, that our soul becomes a true nest of love. God, in His infinite mercy, welcomes every part of our lives, and as we open to Him, we allow His presence to fill our hearts and turn it into a sacred refuge. This act of consolation is also a call to gratitude. When we recognize everything God offers us, we are moved to want to give something in return. Even though we know that we cannot give equal to your love, we wish, like Padre Pio, that our soul is a place where God finds affection and devotion. This love inspires us to be better, to seek holiness and to live each day with the intention of honoring and pleasing the Lord. May we learn from Padre Pio to make our lives a space of welcome and love for God. May our attitudes and thoughts be in harmony with this desire to offer sincere comfort to the Creator, showing, through each gesture, our gratitude and our loyalty. In the next request, Padre Pio expresses his concern with the proximity of death and the desire to be united with Jesus to the end. Let us then reflect on the importance of spiritual preparation and communion with God as a source of strength and peace in the face of the transience of life. Spiritual preparation for eternity. Stay with me, Jesus, for it is late and the day already declines. Life passes, death approaches, judgment, eternity are prevented. In this passage of prayer, Father Pio leads us to a reflection on the transience of life and the proximity of death. He speaks sincerely about the natural cycle of life and the need to be spiritually prepared for eternity. Awareness of one's own finitude arouses a sense of spiritual urgency, a call to cultivate faith, love, and forgiveness, knowing that earthly life is passing and that one day we will meet before God. Padre Pio understood that the preparation for eternity is not only done at the final moment, but throughout life. Every thought, every action, and every decision we make shapes our spirit and prepares us for the definitive encounter with the Creator. He knew that being ready for eternity is living according to the teachings of Jesus, seeking holiness each day and remaining firm in faith. The proximity of death is a theme we often avoid, but Padre Pio teaches us that facing it with serenity and faith is an act of wisdom and surrender. He recognizes that the end of earthly life is just a passage to true life with God. This request from Padre Pio is an example for us to seek to live with the awareness that our soul is eternal and that we are here to prepare our spirit for the encounter with the divine. For many, the idea of judgment can arouse fear, but Father Pio shows us that when we live in communion with God, this passage is a natural transition to the fullness of life. The prayer reminds us that time goes by quickly and that every moment is precious. When we have eternal life as our horizon, we come to value each day as an opportunity to love, serve, and approach God. Spiritual preparation also involves the detachment of material goods and ephemeral pleasures. Father Pio reminds us that the true treasure is in our relationship with God, and that everything we accumulate in this world is passing. Only what we do for the sake of God and the neighbor remains and accompanies us for eternity. Living with this perspective helps us make wise decisions, focus on what really matters, and seek higher purpose. In asking Jesus to remain by his side, Father Pio demonstrates his confidence and dependence on divine love and mercy. He knows that, before the mystery of death, only the presence of Jesus can bring comfort and peace. This supplication is an invitation for all of us, on our spiritual journey, to cultivate a deep relationship with God, so that at the time of passage we are at peace, assurance that we are returning to the eternal home. Preparation for eternity also involves sincere regret and forgiveness. Father Pio knew that to be at peace with God, it was necessary to recognize his own flaws, ask forgiveness, and forgive others. This process of reconciliation purifies us and helps us to be ready to meet God. When we repent and forgive, we free ourselves from the weight of hurts and guilt, allowing our hearts to be light and in harmony with the divine. May we, as a Padre Pio, live every day with the awareness of eternity and the sincere desire to always be prepared for the encounter with God. May this preparation be a path of love, peace, and renewal, a process in which we become closer and closer to the heart of Christ. In the next request, Padre Pio speaks of the importance of spiritual communion, asking Jesus to be the light that dissipates the darkness and the strength that sustains him. Let us then follow to reflect on communion as a source of peace and happiness for the soul. Spiritual communion such as light and livelihood. Stay with me, Jesus, for this night of life, with all the dangers, I need you. Make me know as your disciples from bread, so that communion is the light that dissipates darkness, the force that it sustains me, the only happiness of my heart. At this moment of prayer, Padre Pio expresses the need for spiritual communion, a union with God that transcends the physical and reaches the soul. He compares life to night, full of challenges and dangers that often seem insurmountable to us, and, asking for Jesus' presence, he reminds us that communion is a source of light and strength in darkness. Father Pio talks about the importance of knowing Jesus in an intimate way, just as the disciples recognized him by leaving bread. This allusion brings us to the power of the Eucharist, where Christ is present and feeds us spiritually. For Father Pio, communion is not just a ritual, but a true encounter with God, where the soul finds comfort and refuge. This request reflects the desire for a continuous connection, a communion that is renewed at every moment and brings peace to the heart. This light that Jesus brings into the soul dissipates the darkness of doubt, fear, and hopelessness. Father Pio knew that without this presence we would be vulnerable at the mercy of negative influences and temptations. But when we are in communion with Christ, this light illuminates our interior, helping us to discern what is true and protecting us against spiritual dangers. This communion is a constant source of strength, renewing our faith and helping us support the difficult times. For Padre Pio, this union is the only happiness of your heart. He understands that, more than anything in this world, it is the love of Christ that brings true joy, a love that is eternal and that does not depend on external circumstances. This happiness is not ephemeral. It is a deep peace that remains in our being, regardless of the trials we face. Spiritual communion, as Padre Pio teaches us, is a transformative experience that illuminates our steps and gives us courage. It is the foundation that keeps us firm before storms and makes us feel that even in the greatest adversities, we are accompanied by God's infinite love. This feeling of presence allows us to face the unknown with serenity, trusting that Christ is our guide. In ordering this communion, Father Pio invites us to make her a daily practice, where we renew our commitment to God and His teachings. He reminds us that by seeking this union, we are approaching the divine essence, making our lives an expression of faith and love. This communion is the sustenance that strengthens us and makes us persevere, even when everything around us seems to be in darkness. May we, as a Father Pio, seek this communion with Jesus every day, finding in Him the strength and light we need to live a life of purpose and peace. Following forward, Padre Pio expresses his desire to be united with Jesus at the time of death. We will continue to understand how this final union represents the climax of spiritual life, a desire to remain with Christ forever. The union with Jesus at the time of death. Stay with me, Lord, because at the time of death I want to be united with you, if not by communion, at least for grace and love. In this passage, Padre Pio expresses the sincere desire to be united with Jesus at the end of his life. He recognizes the importance of this moment and yearnings for crossing it in complete union with the Savior. Asking the Lord to remain by his side, he demonstrates his confidence that even in the passage of earthly life to the eternal, he will be safe in the hands of God. This desire for unity at the time of death is an expression of deep faith, where the hope of a definitive encounter with Christ overcomes the fear of death. For Padre Pio, the presence of Jesus is more important than any other consolation, for he knows that the soul finds its true peace and redemption alongside the Creator. Prayer reminds us that even in the most critical moments, God offers us His grace and love. The union with Christ, even in the final moment, is the apex of every spiritual walk. It is the moment the soul surrenders completely, leaving behind all that is material and ephemeral. Father Pio teaches us that preparation for this moment begins now, through a life of prayer, faith, and love of neighbor. The closer we are from God in life, the more natural this transition will be, as a continuation of the friendship we cultivate with Him. Padre Pio's request reflects hope in eternal life, a certainty that death is not the end, but a passage to the encounter with divine love. He wants this final union to happen not only by sacramental communion, but also for the spiritual bond that connects him to Christ. This union is the reward of a life lived in faith, surrender, and trust in God. When thinking about death, Father Pio does not manifest fear, but a serene expectation of being in the presence of the Lord. This is a call for us to cultivate this preparation, understanding that every prayer, every gesture of goodness, and every act of faith brings us closer to God. Thus, when the moment comes, we will be ready to embrace eternity with the heart alone. The desire to be united with Jesus in death shows us that the end of earthly life is only the beginning of a new journey, where the soul rests in the company of the Creator. This union is the greatest consolation we can find, because it reminds us that we are not alone and that we are loved and welcomed by God at every stage of our existence. May we, as Father Pio, ask God to prepare us for this moment, to grant us the grace to live and depart in His peace. May this final union be the crowning of a life dedicated to love and truth, and that, like him, we can experience the serenity of who knows that he is coming home. Following, Padre Pio makes a request for a constant presence of Jesus, without seeking rewards, but only the grace to be with him. Let us then reflect on this disinterested desire to be with God, the pure love that is sufficient and that leads us to genuine devotion. Divine presence as a unique reward. Stay with me, Jesus, do not ask for divine consolations, because I do not deserve them, but the gift of your presence, oh. Yes, I ask.